Welcome to the Top Order podcast. It's just me and Stu this week on the IPL Lipshore Index Power Rankings. We are just 2 games away, though, from the conclusion of the group stages for the teams that have got the most left to play for in this tournament. We'll talk about the Sunrisers running. We're also going to go through teams 1 to 10. We're going to rank them into little tiers in these power rankings. The maybes, the yeses, and we'll spend a little bit of time on the let's have a better crack next season as well. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Lipshore Power Index. Stay tuned. Stu, we keep saying this, but we're at the real business end of the tournament now. We've got a couple of games to go in the tournament for a number of the teams. So I think we'll talk a little bit about teams in sort of rankings, and it's going to be no surprises that we're going to be pretty close to the table now in terms of where teams are, because that is where they are going to be at the finish of this. We've only got a couple of question marks probably in terms of, I guess, the order in which we might see that, maybe even the top 2 finish. But yeah, pretty sure that they're going to be there and thereabouts. We've then got probably 3 or maybe 4 teams that mathematically can make the playoffs still, but mathematics is probably the only thing that a couple of those teams have got in their favour. And then we'll talk about, I guess, the teams in a little bit less detail that are going to need to rebuild. We've also got some talking points, I guess, as well. So Ravi Jadeja out in an unusual way in the CSK's last outing, I think, is against the Rajasthan Royals. And then, look, I guess I'm just keen to ask you an overarching question as well. We were just talking off air about where we're at with the tournament. We're 11, 12, 13 games in, something like that for all the teams now. Has this just gone on maybe 10 days too long in terms of maintaining that interest? It sounds, it feels more like a marathon than the sprint that T20 cricket is.
Oh, lot to unpack there, but I think just on that last point, probably yes for me. I mean, I sort of wanted to get into it a bit later, or one of the talking points I had for a bit later is around kind of the workload for the players, and I wonder now. I mean, from a personal point of view, yes, I think we often talk about this with the Big Bash, how long it goes on for, and I think inevitably when you've got a tournament that has 10 different teams in it. You want to get, the organisers want to get bang for buck, right? And every IPL game is, I'm sure, worth a fortune to the TV broadcast rights. So, look, you can't really blame them for trying to get the money there. I would say that it sort of felt for a while that, every game was kind of making a difference in terms of the table. Now, these last kind of 2 weeks, as much as we still have like 7 teams that are mathematically in with a chance to make the playoffs, it does seem like teams are now going 1 good game, 1 bad game, 1 good game, 1 bad game, and kind of we're just waiting for these games that matter the most in this final week that we're about to have, and then these knockout games. And I think for me still in a week where we've gone through the power rankings now. This is going to be the 8th time that we go through these power rankings. I have decided to put them in tiers because I want to focus more on kind of where we're at in this tournament rather than kind of each individual team and trying to break down what they can do better and what they can do worse and so on and so on.
So let's start with, I guess, tier 1, so that the teams at the top of the top of the table, but also the top of the power rankings as well. So, look, I guess no surprises who we've got in 2 of these spots. I guess there might be one that's up for a little bit of debate. But what does tier 1 look like, and what are your questions?
So I guess, tier 1 for me, and actually, like if we're going to be really granular about these tiers, I think we've got to the point where KKR is probably in a tier of their own, to be honest. The way that they're playing, they go through this week. They beat Mumbai in a 16-over game. That makes it 4 wins on a row. They played GT tonight. But I think the conversation around them this year for me has been about their bowling. We haven't really worried about their batting. It's been such a power-packed game. It's been, can their bowlers kind of come to the party? And now when you look at the top of the wickets charts, it's filled with KKR players, in the top sort of 15. I think there might be 4 or 5, or maybe 4 KKR players. I haven't got it in front of me. You think of the likes of Chakravarti, who's becoming very, very important for them. We highlighted him a couple of weeks ago, and he just keeps getting better and better. The way he kind of controlled the Mumbai batters in that game, in that 16-over game, ended up picking up Rohit Sharma. I think he got Hardik in the end as well. Really, really impressive stuff. And, when you look at the likes of some of the other spinners going around at the moment, and the struggles that some of them are having, the quality bowlers like Kuldeep Yadav, like the leg spinner from Yuzvendra Chahal from Rajasthan. The fact that those guys are now finding it trickier, I think, than Varun is, it makes for very interesting stuff. But yeah, I think KKR, probably, to be fair, are out in a tier of their own, and that probably makes you pretty happy, Binksy.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely does. I think the rhetoric that we've had certainly throughout the course of the power rankings has been, batting wise, we've not really had too many worries, and we've documented, I think, how good they've been at the top of the order plenty of times with Sunil Narine and Phil Salt. That's a question mark for them, obviously, going into the latter stages of the tournament. They're going to need to find someone who strikes at, somewhere around 170, 180 and averages 40. Not an easy thing to conjure up for the playoffs. But the question marks really have been around that bowling attack. We've said, can they continue to do this? I guess if I were kind of looking at the analysis from the outside looking in, I'd be saying where the vulnerability is in that KKR bowling attack is, look, probably that whilst they've got some guys up the top in terms of their wickets, and you talk about Ram Chakravarti, they've also got some guys that are up there in terms of, a Dre Russ and Harshit Rana, but economy rate wise, that they're closer to 10s than they are to 9s or even 8s. Narine is the one that really, really stands out, isn't he? Averaging 20, 15 wickets and going at under 7 and over. And I think, ultimately, the way that they've utilised him throughout the course of the tournament as a bowler, really, first and foremost, if you look at his T20 pedigree, and then they've said, right, you go and have a free hit. And boy, he's enjoyed having that free hit through the whole course of the tournament. So I think if you're going to kind of look at where you might see them as being, vulnerable, if they can even be seen as vulnerable going into the final stages of this tournament, then it will be that bowling piece. But I think we've also got to address the momentum conversation at some point. I'm probably not as big a believer as that than some other guys on the pod. But when we look at their recent form, there's an awful lot of green on there, and there's not too many teams, probably with the exception of the RCB, who are probably too little too late, that can rival them in terms of the form that they've brought into the final third of this group stage.
Before we get to the momentum, because the momentum one is fascinating, especially when we look at these 3 teams in this top tier. So the other 2 teams are Rajasthan, who on that momentum swing are really on the downturn, and the Sunrisers, who, are kind of another one of those teams that just when you think that they're catching fire again, they sort of have a bad loss, and you start to wonder what's going on. But I think the thing that stuck out to me, particularly with KKR and obviously with the Sunrisers, and is the power game of both of those 2 batting lineups. And we touched on it there. And, I had a bit of tongue in my cheek, last week when I was saying, has Sunil Narine changed the T20 game forever with what he's doing? But I do think that this IPL has kind of signaled a shift, I suppose, in batting approaches. And I'm really fascinated to see how it projects forward, because it's mainly because it's worked. Like KKR, Sunrisers, I think DC's fortunes have changed once they brought in Jake Fraser-McGurk. If you look at RCB, Kohli's approach has certainly changed this year, and that's helped the way that they are going about things. And I mean, look, the Sunrisers LSG game is the best example of this in terms of, they hit 30 boundaries from 58 balls. It was, absolutely bananas. But KKR have had plenty of explosive starts. And I mean, these guys are literally trying to hit a boundary every single ball. I mean, do you think that, I'm always thinking, I watch the IPL. I don't have a team that I'm super invested in. I like the Sunrisers. I like CSK. Probably are the top two teams that I try and support. But I'm mainly around the players and thinking about it often from a New Zealand perspective and thinking about how it might transfer into the international game. We've got a T20 World Cup coming up. Do you think that we're going to see this approach just translate straight away? Like, are players going to be going to this World Cup and going, okay, well, now, I'm going to be going out there trying to hit a boundary every single ball, just like I did at the IPL?
I think you'll probably see a couple of different approaches to it, Stu. I think we'll see definitely some of that aggression, and we've been seeing that for a long, long time. So I don't think there's any surprises there. I think what we'll probably need to see, though, is it be a bit more tempered in the World Cup because you've not got the luxury of that impact player. So I suppose, I guess I don't know whether they talk about it in these sort of ways anymore, and they probably don't, to be honest. But I remember when sort of T20 was really evolving, you talked about as a batter what your risk profile was, and you'd say, my risk profile in a 4-day game is maybe 10%. And then my risk profile in a 1-day game maybe goes up to 40%. And then, my risk profile in terms of when I'm prepared to take risks in T20 might go up to 70 or 80%. What we're seeing is these guys probably, because they've got that luxury of an impact player, they're probably operating, on those metrics somewhere in the 90%. In terms of what they're prepared to do, but maybe it will just come a little bit back to the pack in that T20 World Cup where you've only got 11 players that you can get into the game, notwithstanding a concussion or something like that, which obviously isn't going to be a tactical part of the way that teams set up. But look, I definitely think what this has shown is the art of the possible for some of these batsmen. And I do think we will see that continue. And look, I guess that the other factor that we can't really talk too much about is what the wickets are going to be like. But you'd think they're going to be pretty decent batting wickets throughout the course of the tournament. So yeah, I think we're in for plenty of fireworks in this World Cup. But I do think we'll see the scores come back to something approaching normality. In general terms, will we see someone score 250? Probably at some point, but will it happen every other game the Sunrisers playing? Probably not.
Fair enough, and so let's go back to that momentum thing that you talked about, because I mean, you look at these top three teams, the difference between them at the moment in terms of even just when you look at the green and red of the wins and losses is quite stark. Obviously, we touched on before, KKR have won 4 in a row, could make it 5 tonight against Gujarat. Rajasthan have now lost 3 in a row, and the Sunrisers have kind of been going back and forth. For Rajasthan, they were a side that, was particularly, I mean, I think they're still locked into the playoffs, so I don't think they've got the asterisk against their name yet, but I would say something would have to go horribly wrong for them to miss out. But they've been locked in, I suppose, for a while now. What do you think is going wrong? Like, does it matter that they've got 3 losses in a row, because you said before you're not so big on the momentum piece. I think that they've gotten Andre Berger back, and I think actually when I try and look at what is not working for them right now, it's actually quite hard to pinpoint sort of exactly what they've been missing, because it just feels like everyone maybe is just a notch or two down from where they've been at other parts of the season. For the most part, they're not losing by big margins. They're just, it's just not quite happening for them, even though they've got Sanju Samson, Rian Parag averaging 60 at, strike rates of 150. Chahal's not quite as good as he was before, but he's still, up near the top of the run charts. Trent Bolt's averaging, or, is only conceding 8 and over and still, taking wickets up front. So I just don't know what to make about Rajasthan, and they're probably the one team in this tier. As much as Sunrisers is actually 4th on the table, they're the one side, Rajasthan are the one side that I just don't know where to place at the moment because of their current form.
Yeah, look, I think, again, the table probably tells you this, and certainly that recent run of form probably tells you this, that, you'd probably rather be KKR right now than Rajasthan, for obvious reasons, as well as some not so obvious reasons. I think why I'm not super concerned about. My other pick for the tournament in the Royals is that they've done the hard work to get to that, magical. We set it as 8 games, was roughly where you needed to be from a wins perspective. They play, I think, Punjab next, and then finish against KKR. So look, there's no doubt they're going to want to win both of those games. They'll definitely want to win one of them, I think, just so that they don't have, a sea of red in the last sort of 4 or 5 games. But I think the bigger question for them is, can, some parting words from Josh Butler, can some of the experienced players in that squad, including Trent Bolt, actually just get the reset right for the playoff stages? Remind them about what they've done throughout the course of the tournament. Their batting has been, really, really strong. I would say to an extent, missing Josh Butler is going to be less of an impact for them, given the impact that, the likes of Parag and Sampson have had throughout the tournament, than the loss of Phil Salt is going to be for KKR. And then we might talk about, some of the other teams in that respect as well. So that's where I think that they can take a lot of confidence from, getting to that stage in the tournament pretty early. They came out the gates really, really hard. It is now really just getting those guys to reset the dressing room ahead of the playoff stages, assuming obviously that they probably will go through, even if they lost both games. There'd have to be some permutations that involve some significant net run rate swings for them to not make it. And you'd probably say that they should beat Punjab in the game in a couple of days' time. But yeah, what do you think? Where are they worried? We talked about KKR potentially worried about their bowling, maybe not so much their batting. Where would you see the Royals' worries in those playoff stages?
I'm still not overly worried about them from a personnel point of view. I think your point really around, they just need to win one game again. They just need to, if they beat Punjab, then I think they're all but, locked into that top 2. So I think Sunrisers can still catch them. But, I think they want to be in that top 2 because that gives you the opportunity to win one game and you're straight into the final and you get that second chance. So I think that's important. And really, obviously, you don't want to go into the playoffs losing 5 on the bounce. And that's the prospect that they could face. And, it'll be, I think if they go in and beat Punjab, it'll be fascinating to see kind of what them and KKR do in terms of whether they try and fox each other in that last game or anything like that, give players rests. KKR will be in a better position probably to potentially rest some players if they feel like they need to. So, yeah, look, I'm not worried. In a one-off game, if you lined up all of their players, there's just so much experience on that chart that I'm not especially concerned in a knockout game. I think they just need to get back to winning ways.
So we're 20 minutes in and we're still in the top tier. I've got to admit, I'm a little surprised at the third team that you've got in there. So I know this might not necessarily reflect how you think the table's going to finish, but you've got the Sunrisers in third. Are they third best placed at the moment? Is that how you're reading this, or you're saying they're third best placed on recent form?
I think they're these 3 teams are the 3 teams that I think are best placed to win this tournament. I said it last week. I had the Sunrisers up here, and last week was really a clarifying week for me in terms of how I viewed these sides as title contenders. And I still do think that the Sunrisers are in here. They, like I said before, they've been super inconsistent. They obviously lost this week to Mumbai, but that demolition against LSG, it just shows you what they can do when they're on form. And I think when Abhishek and Travis Head get them off to that flying start, and I think they've shown in this tournament, 1, they can do that against anyone. 2, it can go horribly wrong. So, whether they can put 2 games back to back and kind of make that or do enough to kind of get themselves to win that tournament, who knows? But I think that the power that they possess, and even some of the work that their bowlers are starting to do, and I suppose for the momentum piece and the struggles that some of these teams behind them that we're about to get into in Tier 2, I think that I still have them, above those teams in terms of actually winning the tournament, whether or not they finish above them on the final ladder or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the point I really take away from that, Stu, I think, and we've talked about this over the course of the last couple of weeks, is from a bowling perspective. The sum of their parts has actually really started to come to the party in the last probably 3 weeks, the Sunrisers. So I think, when you've got someone the class of Pat Cummins, Natarajan has been pretty impressive, but when you then look at the tables, they've got nobody in the top 10 from a wickets perspective. So it has been the batting firepower that, has probably stolen some of the headlines, but they're now just, I think, starting to find, their stride in terms of that bowling. We asked the question of them, can they actually string together some bowling performance or bowling performances that win them games? And we've seen that. I think a worry would be that they still can get dispatched occasionally, from a bowling perspective. Mumbai Indians chased down, a modest total, pretty comfortably, to be honest, with Sky's 100. That's got to be a week or so ago now, I guess. So that, there's still some question marks there, but yeah, look, I think definitely sort of they're peaking from a bowling perspective, or certainly, if not peaking, putting some performances together. And again, I think probably their running, it sounds bizarre. You'd probably rather be them with 12 games played and 2 to go than CSK, who play an inform RCB next. And if they lose, they've got to sit around and watch the rest of the results unfold. If they win, okay, they put themselves on 16 points, but there's still some guys, that can potentially, upset them.
Totally, and I think that's a nice segue into Tier 2, because this one is a fascinating one for me, because again, that it's sides filled with sort of different trajectories at the moment in terms of how they're playing. We've got, in no particular order, I've got CSK, DC, LSG, and RCB in this tier. And I mean, on pure form, RCB is top of that pile, because, they had big wins against Punjab Kings and Delhi Capitals this week. That makes it 5 wins in a row. They're absolutely flying. Rajat Patidar, who couldn't buy a run early on, is now looking in great touch. Cameron Green's contributing, getting run-outs. Lockie Ferguson's back, which is delightful from a New Zealand point of view, taking wickets, trusting that slower ball. Virat's doing it all, getting runs. He got that brilliant run-out from, running in from the boundary. Siraj is back. They just look like a completely different side. And you said maybe they've left their run too late. Maybe they have, but they have an opportunity now to beat CSK in their final game. That they've got, one of the few sides that on the points that they have that actually has a positive net run rate. So I think I saw, if they beat CSK by, if they score 200 and they beat CSK by 18 runs or more in their final game, that's enough to push them from a run rate perspective above CSK. Yeah. So they could sneak in. And honestly, if it would be some story if they can charge home and sneak into the playoffs. And if they did, I don't think anyone wants to play them with the way that they're going. And now that, the bowling attack that has been so horrendous all season is actually starting to find some form, because we know that the power they possess now with Will Jacks and Kohli and Faf and Cam Green starting to contribute. We've got Patidar, we've got Dinesh Karthik. That they're a scary side that you do not want to face. So I think those top 3 teams are probably thinking, come on, CSK, let's do the job and just keep RCB out of these playoffs, because I'd much rather play CSK than RCB at the moment.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think, look, I guess what I've got written down is I think that, Sunrisers, I think, are in the pound seats of those teams, because they've got the biggest, available resource in terms of 2 games to make their run to the playoffs. But I think obviously, that game, is it tomorrow night? Is probably is probably going to be hopefully a blockbuster, because there's definitely going to be something on it going into that game. I guess it depends who's writing the better fairy tales, isn't it? MS Dhoni or Virat Kohli?
Totally, and look, CSK. I said it last week. I have no idea about this team anymore. They're just such a mixed bag. They lost to Gujarat, the team that I think on paper you would have thought that they were going to beat this week. They lost, but then they go out and beat Rajasthan, and that was a super important win against the Royals. And as I just said, somehow they kind of find themselves, I don't think, playing very well at all. Their bowling attack has been decimated with injuries and unavailabilities, as we talked about last week. They used Daryl Mitchell for 4 overs earlier on in the week for some reason. As much as it's kind of fun to see him at the bowling crease, it was a bizarre thing that kind of happened. And yes, somehow they still sort of find themselves third on the ladder. And I mean, maybe you can talk to me about where you're at with CSK, but on that most recent game, did you see the Jadeja dismissal? Because that's a fascinating one, that obstructing the field, because you just don't see it given very often, I don't think.
No, you don't. I guess having seen it, you can make an argument either way. I think batters and look, I guess speaking with some experience of this, if you're being brutally honest, you do slightly. Certainly, if you don't change your line, you're aware of the line that you're running when you're batting, and particularly, where a throw might be coming in from. And you've got to say, on balance, that looked like, it was pretty borderline from Jadeja as to whether he knew what he was doing. He certainly had a look over the shoulder. I can see why that was given out. And look, I think again, we're just going to see more and more of that now that we've got DRS and almost the bunker in the game of cricket now. We're going to want to get these decisions correct. And if you've got the camera angles and you've got the ability to go and review it, these are huge moments in T20 games of cricket. So, look, absolutely see why they went upstairs, and look, absolutely see why it was given out. Given out as well. Not that it actually made a massive difference on the result, obviously.
No, and I mean, where are you at with CSK? Because I think going into the tournament, we probably thought they were a side that we talked about them a lot. It's interesting because I think we talked about them a lot to start this. Probably up until about a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about them as a really safe team. They were a side that you could kind of bank on getting a decent performance out of, and the other team had to beat them, is how I sort of felt about them. Now I don't feel that way at all. Now, I mean, obviously their bowling attack came good last night. Simajit Singh, did a wonderful job for them, picked up some wickets. They brought in Theekshana, which, I mean, I think it's kind of strange that we haven't seen much of him this season. They've sort of, we've seen Gleeson, we've seen Santner in the past few weeks. It's been a real mixed bag, and like I said before, I just don't know what to make of them. And as much as they might sneak into these playoffs, I'd be pretty happy to play them in any knockout game right now.
You'd be pretty happy to play CSK in any knockout game. Okay. Yeah. Look, I guess, it won't surprise regular listeners and viewers to know that I'm going to disagree with you. I think with the exception of Ruturesh Gaikwad, who's had a pretty stellar tournament, and we've talked a lot about some of the guys that have had 6-7 scores out of their 10 or 11 at bats throughout the course of the tournament. He's up there in that regard, isn't he? I think he's probably got 4 or 5 50s, and I think he's got 100 as well in the tournament. So really, really strong. I'm going to say that what's in their locker is they haven't really fired at the top of the order, like the Sunrisers and like Rajasthan and like the KKR, but they've got the personnel to do that. Rachin Ravindra has had certainly from your perspective as a Kiwi fan, has had a quieter tournament than you would have liked to have probably seen from him. Daryl Mitchell's had a couple of contributions, particularly in recent times with the bat and with the ball, but again, hasn't really strung that together consistently. So if you think about what they've been able to get out of their lower order, where they have had some very, very decent little cameos from not only the likes of your Donis and your Daryl Mitchells and your Moeen Alis in the last couple of weeks. If their top order all of a sudden comes to the party, then they're actually in a pretty good position for having got some batting time and some form into some of the guys that are providing some of that icing on the cake later down the innings, I guess. So that would be the silver lining, I think, that you would find for the CSK from my perspective. But obviously, I think it is relying a hell of a lot on this shootout against the RCB, where it'll get taken out of their hands, obviously, if they lose that game, and they're gonna be watching those other results very, very carefully.
Totally, and look, from a New Zealand point of view, it was nice to see Rachin get. I mean, I was going to say it's nice to see him get 20 odd, which doesn't sound that impressive on paper, but just the way he went about that innings, I think, was quite nice. In the last game, he'd sort of been run out in the game before. He'd struggled a bit. He'd obviously missed a few games on form, basically. Just hadn't been, started the tournament with a hiss and a roar, and then just fell away with his scores, was dropped. And Daryl Mitchell, had the same. He kind of had the opposite. He started quite slow and now has come to form. So yes, I'd love to see both of those two go. And I just think that that RCB side is flying quite at the moment. I do have two other teams in this tier that we haven't really talked about, and that maybe suggests even there's 2A and 2B in terms of this tier for me at least, and the other two teams are Delhi Capitals and LSG, and LSG is probably the one to focus on the most, I think, because they're just to briefly touch on Delhi, they beat Rajasthan, but then lost to RCB, and they'd actually been in pretty good form before the RCB game. But the way that they were comfortably beaten, that game, Warner came back, but it was pretty much all over at 30 for 4. And they've got LSG in their final game, but I think a lot would have to go their way to actually sneak in. Whereas LSG last week, I think I had them at 4th. They were a side who has been kind of in and around these playoffs on the table, at least playoff positions, for the whole season. They've kind of just hung around in 3rd or 4th or 5th. And I keep saying, I don't really believe in them. I don't really believe in them. But up until this week, their run rate's kind of been good enough. But that game against the Sunrisers has just demolished their run rate. And it's crazy because one bad day at the office, after being, like I said, in and around those spots, their run rate's now a mess. And they do have 2 games in hand. But I guess out of all of these 4 sides, who are you actually picking to make it to this? Assuming if we're assuming that those top 3 make it, who are you actually picking to kind of sneak into this final spot?
Yeah, so it's a weird one. I'm not quite so sure that we know that the top 3 definitely make it. So I think Rajasthan would have to have an absolute calamity to get overtaken. I think from where they are now on 16 points, now would need to win their 2 games and probably do that with some tremendously handsome margins. So look, I think we can definitely say that Rajasthan are there. I think from a Chennai perspective, we've talked about it. There's a really, really big game. I think Sunrisers for me are ahead of Chennai in terms of who goes through, and then I think obviously we're then talking about that permutation of who it is between RCB and Chennai. I don't give Delhi or Lucknow a shot at all. They just need too much in terms of the run rate swings. I think for them to make it. So whilst I think is it 7 teams that are in contention, I think realistically we're looking at five at best that can make those final four spots. But what do you think? What are your permutations? Who are you going to stick that your hard earned $5 on lit?
I think I think RCB might do it. I think they could. Look, it's not going to be easy for them. I guess they're relying on. I mean, LSG can obviously go ahead of them if they do the job and take care of their games. It's still in a way in their hands. But yeah, I think RCB certainly is the side that deserves to be there. And it's as weird as it is. Like I said before, I just think that they're playing better than CSK right now. So in that game, they have an opportunity to do what they've been doing and kind of sneak through. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating. We could sit here and kind of try and predict every single game, and I think that's where we've come unstuck a few times in these power rankings. We sort of I start assuming on paper, all of these teams, okay, this team is better than that team, they're going to win that game. And I think we've seen throughout this tournament that the topsy-turvy nature of the way things are going.
Yeah. Let's quickly look at that third tier, Stu, and really the question marks there aren't about qualification for this tournament, but probably more around IPL form and whether that's a good build-up for the World Cup, which is just around the corner. India don't presumably play too much international cricket leading into that tournament. I know most other countries have got some form of tune-up, but any big worries for India going into the World Cup, particularly with the likes of Shubman, Gill and Rohit and Hardik coming from the teams that are down the bottom of the power rankings at the moment?
Yeah, so obviously in Tier 3, I've got the remaining three teams, Gujarat, Mumbai, and the Punjab Kings. And I think there's a few things to kind of take away from looking forward to the World Cup for these teams, because yes, as you said right at the start of the show, these teams now, it's about looking to next year or personal milestones or personal getting into form for the World Cup or whatever you want. I mean, Shubman Gill, him and Sai Sudarshan earlier on in the week, score the 100th. Shubman Gill scores the 100th IPL 100, and a few balls later, Sai Sudarshan gets the 101st, and just wild, really. That, I mean, astonishing that the two of them put that partnership together. Kind of getting up there in terms of records for opening or for partnerships, and the job that they can do from a personal point of view. But I kind of just, when I see that, I feel like it's remarkable that hundreds are so easy to come by now. I know we've talked about so much of the power and all that cut stuff, but I just still feel like a T20 100 is an astonishing achievement, but it really isn't now. Like, I think we've reached the point where earlier on in the tournament we're going, oh well, if you bat 60 balls and you bat through the innings, then if you don't get 100, then you're a failure. So yeah, it's kind of swung, almost 360 in terms of what we expect from these openers now. Yeah,
look, absolutely. I think there was a time where there was the odd graphic going up on the I guess the TV coverage, and you were looking at all the guys who had scored 100 in particularly in international T20 cricket. I think we're at 1,200-1,300 or something in this tournament so far. So you are getting them, reasonably regularly. And certainly I think in terms of your 70s and 80s, you're seeing, heaps and heaps of those. And you're seeing some of those off ridiculously low number of balls as well. So I guess it's a matter of time before we see a double 100, isn't it, in this format?
Cheapest double. Well, I guess maybe if these guys are trying to hit a boundary every single ball, if Travis Head bats for 60 balls, maybe Jake Fraser.
Yeah, I mean, I think all you need to do is get one of these guys, and we've seen scores in the sort of 280s and thereabouts. We're going to see a 300 at some point, and you're going to see a guy that probably faces 2/3 of the deliveries in a game at some point. And if you do that, you're probably going to be there or thereabouts in terms of that kind of scoring. But yeah, certainly going to need some coconut water or a bit of Gatorade at the end of it to to rehydrate.
And I mean, we just touched on Shubman Gill. I mean, he's not in the India squad. He's sort of on the reserves bench for them. But I do, I think India should be a little bit worried about some of the form of these guys. I mean, Rohit Sharma especially had a nice start to the tournament. Scored a 100 early on, or midway through the tournament. Probably was contributing, was getting runs, and he in particular, I feel like, was such an important part of their ODI World Cup success. And, I don't need to remind Indian fans how that ended up, but I think that the way he started off their innings in almost every game was so, so crucial. And I mean, at the moment, that last kind of innings he played against, against KKR and the sort of he was getting beaten by the seamers. Varun Chakravarti had him kind of in all sorts of trouble. Yeah, he just looks sort of out of form. And we've touched on Hardik leading into the World Cup. It seems like, as I said earlier, that Yuzvendra Chahal was bowling much better earlier on in the tournament. Now he's not, he's not lost his way. I think that's probably going a bit too far. But yeah, some of those guys that I think looked really strong at the start of the tournament are starting to struggle. And it kind of got me wondering whether this 2-month IPL is actually a good build-up for India, because, it's a lot of games, and they're all, we know that the pressure around IPL, we've seen it this week in terms of owners kind of coming down and almost shouting at some of their players, which at different points has been very, very, very odd kind of scenes, just from, obviously don't know what they're saying to those players. People can look very animated and not be doing a huge amount. But yeah, I don't know, the pressure that goes on. And I don't know. I just feel like potentially there's going to be a lot of players, and obviously India has the most players in the IPL. So I feel like you finish this tournament and go, it's time for a rest now. But there's about a week gap, I think, between the IPL final and then straight into this T20 World Cup. So they're just not going to get it. So I think in many ways that's the thing I'm more worried about from an Indian point of view, and any of the other teams that have a lot of players in the IPL, more than form, because I think in T20, particularly for batters, it can turn around very, very quickly.
Yeah, look, I don't think they're going to have too many worries going into the World Cup India. I think, we'll do a World Cup preview show, I'm sure, at some point. And look, from my perspective, that they go into this tournament as favourites in the Caribbean. I think we've seen spin play a pretty decent part in that part of the world. They've, without a shadow of a doubt, got the best options, I think, of any squad going into that tournament. I think we've talked a hell of a lot about the impact player rule. They've got impact players all down the card already. If we look at the likes of a Ravi Jadeja, where he's going to potentially bat in the order. I know we've probably had some question marks around Hardik Pandya, but he can contribute and probably will contribute throughout the course of that tournament. And then their batting lineup is just absolutely crackerjack. And then the biggest thing I think that goes in their favour is that not only has Jasprit Brummer had a really good tournament from a wickets perspective, he's had a really good tournament from a fitness perspective as well. I think he's played all of the Mumbai Indians games. Certainly may have missed one. So I think that really bodes well, because he's had some injury worries. So I'm not super concerned, and I think that they will have seen this as a pretty good tune-up. And then I think the final factor is that difference with the 50-over edition of the tournament. And look, we talked a hell of a lot about the way what were they, 10-1 for that tournament, or something like that in terms of their final record. They have a lot of pressure when they're playing at home, and they have a lot of pressure through the IPL as big franchise players. I think they'll really enjoy being in the Caribbean. I think probably as a place to go and watch cricket, they'll get mobbed a little bit if they are making it across to the US at some point. But I think for the Caribbean, it's just such, I know it's a cliche, but sort of a laid back lifestyle. I don't think you'll see, too many fans chasing their team bus or, clamoring outside hotels for a glimpse of Virat. They'll be like, yeah, cool, nice to see you. Hope you enjoy the beach and the rum. So I think it's the perfect environment for that Indian team to be in for a T20, T20 World Cup. So yeah, not too many worries from me.
Sounds good. And yeah, I am very much looking forward to that World Cup. I think, yeah, as I said, it's sort of this from a thoughts ticking over in my brain about how that World Cup is going to play out. This IPL has been very, very interesting, and I think for bowlers, we've seen, you've got to have your change ups now, and
Yeah.
for as seam bowlers, I think that's been crucial. We've seen how important spin can be, and we've seen how important just going hard from a batting point of view. So yeah, look, I think we'll get stuck into that in a couple of weeks' time in terms of previewing that tournament. And yeah, I don't have too much more on the rest of this power rankings. I think I'm just keen to get into these knockout games because yeah, as you said earlier on, it feels like it's been a long time coming. And now I just want to see how it all plays out in the biggest stages of this tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, next Monday, which is the 20th of May here in New Zealand, will be our playoff preview. Then the following Monday, the 27th, will be us wrapping up the final. And then also, leading into that T20 World Cup preview. We haven't even got to, some big news in Test cricket over the course of the last few days, particularly for an Englishman. So we'll have to get to that when we preview the English summer and Test matches. I think July is when those Test matches kick off. It's bizarre to think that we're only 2 weeks into May, and I think there's been 6 rounds or certainly 5 rounds of county championship cricket played in beanies and scarves and all kinds of stuff. So we'll get to some red ball cricket, but it's still probably a couple of months away, isn't it? We've got this World Cup. Sandwiched right into the middle of the English summer, which is unusual. Yeah, unusual timing for that. But there you go. It is good night and God bless for us here though in Auckland, New Zealand. We will be back, as we said, with that playoff preview, if not slightly before, if we've got any breaking news towards the end of this week. But definitely be back in your feeds with the final edition of our power rankings, and then the wrap of the final just a week or so after that as well. But thanks for listening or watching. We'll see you soon on the Top Order podcast. Good night.